order for which they appear on the draw.
Hi everyone, Comfort here. Congratulations on making it this far. Good luck.
Thank you, Comfort. Darren? Shit. Darren, are you here?
Yeah, I am. I'm present.
Can you please introduce yourself, please?
Oh, okay. I'm Darren, pronouns he, him. Congratulations for reaching the finals. Looking forward for a great round.
Thank you. Dina?
Hi everyone, I'm Dina Pamuri. We're going to be your panelist in this final round, and congratulations to make it into the final round. I wish you the best wish. Yeah, good luck.
Thank you. Nat?
Hi, Nathaniel Dube here. Great to see you guys on finals. Good luck. We'll see who wins. Here.
All right, thank you. Reen, I just want to confirm, is there a timer here on the Zoom? Is it possible to time here?
There is no timer here. I'm not certain, but normally they are on server timers. I don't know if it works well. But if it doesn't work, just like have to give a time on that end.
Okay, that's fine. All right. All right, so I think I can set one. All right, I think I'll share my screen. I don't know, for the timer. Just, oops, the host isn't allowing sharing for the meeting. Guys, please time yourselves on your end.
You can start. I'll just enable the options along. I think by second video should be good.
All right, great. So guys, welcome to the grand finals once again. We are all experienced debaters here, so I'm not going to go into explaining all the necessary things you need to know. Please time yourselves on your end. Speeches are for 7 minutes, 15 seconds. Anything you say past that time will be taken into consideration. And also try to take POIs and try to ask POIs. If you're going to be accepting POIs within the protected time as per the updated manual, I would appreciate you say that just at the start of your speech so that speakers are also aware of that. Aside that, I would not be allowing people to ask POIs within the protected time. All right. I think you guys can see my screen. Welcome the Prime Minister to start the debate.
All right. Can you confirm audibility?
Yes, you are audible.
All right. Perfect then. All right. So yeah, first things first, shout to Bunda adjudicators. I think you guys have really not only just did good adjudication for the tournament or really helped us grow through your feedback, but I think the very fact that you're able to give time to this particular, like, I think moment is what is most valuable, and hopefully whatever arguments and clever ideas we're gonna make you smile, and while you're still smiling, they're going to be things that you hold valuable within the debate. Think, yeah, secondly, shout out to Lebo for being my debate and life partner. I think out of everything inside debate rooms and the trophies and the medals, whatever we get and the moments we have here, you're the most valuable moment within everything. So yeah, I love you. So yeah, with that, let me then begin my speech. And then shout out to everyone. Shout out to everyone who's here to watch. Shout out to everyone who was in the tournament, you met the experience with WoW. Shout out to all the teams. Yeah, good luck to everyone. Right, perfect. In that sense, then I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Right. Start. I think the most important thing to understand about this debate is for all of human history, death has been the ultimate loss of agency. You can choose how you live, but you cannot choose whether your existence ends when your body does. You can never choose when that also particularly happens. I think this is why human beings always evasively spend most of their lives trying to run away from one of the most inevitable experiences. I think what you then get, more importantly, is that this technology gives us radically a different possibility, right? Something reality altering, because biological death without the end of like conscious life is what then gets to exist in our world. What then happens is, yes, you still biologically die, but your consciousness and your existence and your experience of that consciousness doesn't end, it continues to continue. We believe that then states in of themselves, because they put soldiers in risk and their lives at extraordinary risk, they then have a special obligation to give them the choice of what happens to them after the risk becomes fatal. But I think this was the most obvious case that you thought we're just going to run. I'm going to extend it. I think the reason why this technology obviously is going to still be justifiably to trickle down to society, even if Oppo try to build up wherever it's going to be harmful, I think the first thing you need to understand, soldiers exist specifically because they're like special agents that are frontliners for the duty of society and the nation. They're the ones who are supposed to experience something that could potentially be a threat, but also potentially beneficial for the people. This is why intuitively you have many technologies that are first tested in military, not because they're supposed to just be exclusive, because the adoption of society also should go through first the soldiers that have an obligation to test out whatever could potentially be threatening to people through putting their own self in sacrifice. So I think you still allow soldiers to hold a special duty that is going to be the mechanism that finally bridges that particular gap of making sure that consciousness in of itself continues to exist. So whatever harm that they might claim will trickle down to the slippery slope of it getting to society, I think by the time it gets to people, most of those harms will be mitigatable through an actor who still autonomously chooses so to make that special duty, but through an actor who already has a special obligation towards people, but while that same actor also gets a benefit from particularly extending their own consciousness, since they already put their life in risk for the state and for the people. So a couple of things here. What exactly philosophically this looks like, I think I've already given you that. I don't think we're necessarily saying that soldiers become immortal or soldiers like respawn whatsoever. They still die. Their biological body still dies. The families can still lose physical access to them. What disappears is that specific inevitability of existential finality. You never choosing the moment where you cease to consciously exist, where you metaphysically can't make any more meaningful like choices or any exercise any more meaningful like agency in of itself. So what is this policy going to look like? It's a policy. I think there's probably going to be a lot of contention around whether state is going to do this well in their incentives, right? I think yes, state offers the technology to military personnel. Like the state probably funds and guarantees universal access because the state is the institution asking these people to undertake like lethal risk in the very first place. I think too, you need to understand that this is an offer. It's an opt-in, means you still have the choice not to opt in the very first place. It's not coercion. So Valhalla in of itself is still like perfectly simulated. It's almost realistic. The person retains consciousness. They have subjective experiences, they have memories, they have a personality, they have relationships and capacity for meaningful activity, because the simulation in of itself is like meaningful. But there's a couple of things that are important in make is how this is going to be done. I think first of all, we will probably preserve the genuine opt-in value of this particularly, because soldiers are going to be, while they're still alive, be able to be given that choice to choose where to die. But this is going to be done under informed constraint, because a choice is only genuine when it's informed. So they're going to be given like sessions where they get to understand how the technology like works and how it functions in a genuine sense. But two, what exactly Valhalla in of itself means and the Norse mythology around it in depthly, to know what exactly kind of reality they're getting themselves involved in. But two, most importantly, we're going to have mechanisms and regulations that counter military coercion and state coercion, because they might talk about things like no, state will have the incentive to create more soldiers that fight, but to incentivize more soldiers to give like by advertising that you're going to go to Valhalla. I think first thing, that's what we're going to mitigate. We're going to make sure that Valhalla does not affect your promotion, deployment, and salary, and status, or any benefits. There are going to be repercussions for any form of like proof that military tries to do or make any such incentives in of themselves by making it a reward system where particularly soldiers that choose Valhalla are promoted on that basis or gain any benefits. But two, we're going to have independent administration of the particular technology, because state, yes, will offer the technology and the access, they're going to fund it, but still we can have an independent administration, so the military cannot manipulate or control people's afterlife. So the administration and how it works is going to be under particularly an independent actor, especially one that has already developed the technology and understands this. I don't think this is the military who does that. But two, you're still going to have your posthumous autonomy. So the state cannot terminate, alter, or punish a person's digital existence. There's no recruitment incentives in of itself. The state won't have posters that advertise that join the army so that you get to Valhalla. We're going to heavily have mitigative measures towards this. This is particularly important because it prevents the state from turning the afterlife into a tool for manufacturing soldiers' willingness to die in of itself. So I don't think state particularly is going to do that in of itself or is going to have that. I think the individuals still controls when they enter. The independent institution controls how the technology operates. The state just controls whether the soldiers have access to the technology. So the state is therefore not deciding this is your afterlife. Yeah, any POIs? 3, 2, 1.
Before that, I think it's a stretch from your side of the house. I don't think it's a matter of recreating one's consciousness. I think it's a matter of creating copies, patterns of behavior per se, and memories of an individual. It's not necessarily consciousness. Stop lying.
That's the problem. In a hypothetical motion that says that it's assuming feasibility, you can't question whether this technology is as good as replicating your consciousness. That's the first fault. You will get a fourth in this debate. Don't try that. I think one. So, I don't think. So, perfect simulation, right? Like it says, it perfectly reproduces your subjective experiences. So the person's experiences of friendship, achievement, all of the different memories they have, and the interaction is going to parallelly almost be real as convinced. Even if it doesn't fully do so, it's at least better on comparative. You likely still have some form of conscious, continuity of your consciousness. But also, they should not have a mean to end you, right? Military service creates extraordinary reciprocal obligation already. Soldiers surrender extraordinary control to the state. They deserve to at least be able to continue their consciousness when they do so. But two, the state consequentially assumes a height of duty of care. So normally governments have an obligation not necessarily harm citizens. They do have that primacy to fulfill that obligation both to citizens but also to soldiers, since it's also going to trickle down to society eventually.
House thanks the Prime Minister for that fine speech. We'll welcome the leader of opposition to begin the opening opposition's case.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, cool. Few eyes. I'll take them on about the third minute. I just want to shout out a few people per se. Shout out to my partner. Shout out to CUT Debate Society. Shout out to people in this room that I have encountered and met before. If anyone wins this round, I am going to be happy for them. So yeah, it's going to be a fun one. Okay, I'm just going to run because my phone is actually about to switch off. Cool. I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I don't think it's a matter of preserving one's consciousness that opening government specifically wants to prove on their side of the house, right? Assuming feasibility says that we are just going to take an individual's consciousness through his brain, and then we're going to put this specific individual's consciousness and his life is specifically going to live on through this specific means of existence per se, right? We are going to still push back towards that specific ideology and thinking. We are going to say that you are actually recreating the patterns of behavior of an individual per se. You are recreating the memories of a person per se. You are studying what decisions might that specific individual have to put them in a digital simulation of what that individual could have been like per se if they were continuing to live, and putting them in that specific afterlife of a Valhalla per se, right? But I will still engage this whole fallacy that is trying to push on is the consciousness of an individual and try to actually break that specific thing in the first place, right? I think it's very important for you to specifically understand that digital Valhalla does not necessarily mean that you actually give the life of a soldier specifically back, right? We think this individual does not exist within the real physical world per se. This individual is something that specifically is gone, right? So it's a form of that happens to this individual in the first place, right? And we think at a point where we necessarily want to tell individuals that that is something that is irreversible per se, and we can actually bring them back to a form of consciousness per se, right? We think we don't necessarily allow families to move on from this physical being of this individual in the first place, because they are going to want to interact with this specific instrument in the first place, a digital Valhalla, right? Or they're going to want to be able to pay attention to this thing or actually keep tabs on this thing for them to be able to see this person in the first place. We think this is torture for this these individuals for them to be able to actually move forward on this specific thing per se, right? But I think in a militarily debate per se that speaks about the military, I think two things become very problematic. Firstly, we think it necessarily actually creates exploitation on the soldiers themselves, right? And I understand people in the military are always in some form of like danger per se. Their lives are always in some form of danger because they're going to specifically to fight wars in very dangerous places. They're going to want to win the specific war per se. At a point where you paint a picture that they are going to live their life through digital Valhalla and they're going to be celebrated as heroes per se after this, we think you necessarily give government a power for them to be able to exploit these individuals, right? And to exploit these individuals, right? And tell these individuals that there's a form of necessarily them coming back. What does this exploitation might also look like? It means government putting individuals in danger per se. It means them taking risky decisions and risky missions per se, and promising individuals that their lives is actually going to live long through some form of like digital Valhalla in the first place, right? Which I think individuals opt into this specific thing, not through consent per se, but through the pressures that specifically happen because they know that their life is constantly under threat when they exist in the military per se. Why this is not real consent that opening government specifically wants to actually push on their side of the house. We think consent only happens when someone actually is informed what they specifically consent into in the first place, right? What do these people actually consent into? They consent into a system that they don't specifically understand how it operates per se, right, in the first place. And they also look at the other side of their life, that they might always be danger when they do go to war, right? So they end up just having like a coerced consent into the specific thing, right? But the issue with the specific consent is that there's no opt-out. So at a point where you're in digital Valhalla, it means government specifically is going to own your consciousness in the first place, right? They are going to want to use this consciousness in the first place, and they're going to torment you for a very long time per se because you can't opt out to the specific thing. It actually also breeds exploitation of these soldiers on a second level if you are going to allow something like that to happen. How is that exploitation specifically going to happen? It means government can put you under pressure as an individual within digital Valhalla to change your identity on what they specifically want a soldier to look like in modern day society per se, right? To change you being able to hold them accountable on the decisions that they specifically actually took to send you into war in a dangerous place that was not necessarily like safe for you in the first place to be there, right? We don't get to a point where we hold government accountable because they're going to glorify this digital Valhalla as something that actually gives soldiers a meaning of post life for them to be able to still live, right? The issue with this is that soldiers never get to actually speak out because they are still in the control of government. Government can put much more pressure on them, and government can necessarily squeeze them to actually portray whatever narrative the government wants to push at that specific point in time, right? Secondly, panel, we think it interferes with the process of grieving per se, right? We think, panel, grief specifically in the physical world means that you necessarily never come back as an individual. At a point where your consciousness is kept in a lab somewhere or in a digital Valhalla somewhere with government, where families are likely never going to have access to that thing as they please per se, because it's still going to be government property per se, right? We think, or military or government property per se, right? We think it actually distorts how families can actually move on per se, because they are going to want to always go back to this individual, but they're going to want to share memories in real life and real world scenarios per se. They never get to do that because this person can never necessarily live there. We think it's a psychological, I'll take you later. I think it's a psychological toll that you specifically put on these individuals. We are going to push back to this specific thing in the first place, right? But three, right? We think this form of consent that is permanent ought to be something that we reject because we think this policy specifically exploits individuals within the long run, right? Yes, today you might say yes because you don't know necessarily what you're opting into per se, right? And you don't know, you are not well informed, and it's not voluntary because military tends to actually put pressure on individuals who are the boots on the ground, right? So soldiers never really get a chance to actually opt out of something. They always are being pushed to opt into something or leave the military, or they're going to be framed as people who do not deserve to be in those specific spaces in the first place. The issue with this consent is it's not reversible. Even at the point where they distort your image as an individual, even at the point where your family goes through psychological trauma, you still have to live through that specific thing if you are going to assume that you are conscious as an individual. It means we further torment you as an individual, and we actually bash your, and we actually not bash, but we actually take your family through the hardest of things in society. I think we ought to reject it. I'll take that PI.
Yeah, I think please engage two comparatives. One, you're still going to have this technology. It's only going to be accessible to people who can afford it. The rich who are the only ones that are going to enjoy the unique benefits. But two, also engage the comparative
I'm not going to accept. I'm not going to accept
that.
I'm not going to accept that pure I. We think at a point where we reject the specific policy per se, even though it's feasible, it is not necessarily going to happen within status quo. We think it being a tool that's going to be used by the government means the exploitation of soldiers becomes something that necessarily becomes exacerbated. We think we can't hold government accountable because they'll be able able to purge these individuals to always have a good narrative about government because they are the ones that actually own their consciousness as to want to specifically frame it. We think we never necessarily get these individuals, we never necessarily get accountability from government. They never change their ways. We think a lot of individuals die because government necessarily tells them to push a specific narrative in the first place, right, panel? We think, panel, this is bad also for on a family level, as I specifically told you that families necessarily need to be able to move forward from the specific tool. This debate is not necessarily about just preserving your consciousness as they want to claim it from opening government or even patterns of memories and behavioral characteristics per se, right? We think it's more than that, right? We think how dignified the individual's image and identities can specifically be preserved at a point where the whole ownership of the specific thing is being given over to government. We think it's bad because they can actually change it based on policies and different leaders that go into government. Never been so proud to read.
House thanks the leader of opposition for that fine speech. Moving on, we'll welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to close the opening government case.
Oh, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Great. Okay, cool. Quick shout outs. Unlike my boyfriend, my first shout out is to him. Anyway, shout out to Prince for being the best partner in this tournament, and not only this tournament, but also in life. Yeah, and shout out to everyone who's here today and everyone who's in this room. Congratulations. Yeah, the first in my heart. Boys are liars, but okay, Prince. Congratulations to everyone who's here in this room. I'm really honored to speak in front of you guys. I hope you like my speech, even if I'm most likely not going to like it. I'm joking, I will. Anyways, cool. In the afterlife, please do create a simulation for me to continue dating Prince. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think Prince already tells you, Rabbi. He tells you, 1, people are going to be mostly informed at best. So that means your whole idea of saying that, oh, people are most likely going to create decisions that they don't necessarily want because of sense of coercion or whatsoever, it doesn't exist. Prince has already proven to you why it doesn't exist in our side of the house. Then he tells you about the whole idea of, hey, we think that you're going to disrupt the process of grief because people need to grieve and stuff like that. We do get that, but we still think in their side of the world, people still grieve because the reason why people grieve is because there's someone's death. The death is something that we cannot control, but the only thing that we allow people to do is to have a digital afterlife. This is what we're allowing the soldiers to do. Why are we doing that? We think these are the most valuable people within the society because they've given most of their lives fighting for the nation in of itself and sacrificed their lives in order for them to protect other people. What does this look like, or why is it in response to Rabbi's case? Rabbi tells you that there is going to be a sense of exploitation that is going to exist. What did Prince tell you? Prince told you that in the way that we're going to create this simulation is to make sure that the government doesn't necessarily have to make you coerce you or anything of that sort. Why? Because there is an independent administrator that is most likely going to make sure that each and everything with each and every decision that goes through is a decision that is informed. It's a decision that the soldier has already wanted in the first place. That then means that everything that Rabbi tells you is something that you don't get in the side of the house. 1, the question was not whether people will die, or rather grief is something that is very important and stuff like that. The question here, do you want to give the soldiers who have put their lives in the forefront for years and years the option for them to have this? Not this panel. This is like an option. That means that no one is going to be coerced in any particular point in time. Prince already proved to you how that is likely going to happen in our side of the house. 2, I think with the idea to say that, hey, I think most likely people are going to regret this and there isn't any opt-out mechanism and whatsoever. 1, we've already told you in our side of the house what this looks like and why necessarily people want to do this out of themselves. So this is an option. Do you want a digital afterlife, or do you want the normal afterlife within the status quo? All the problems that he tells you about, hey, accountability, you're most likely not going to hold the government accountable and stuff like that because of the things that are happening. You're most likely going to still face them in his side of the house. So he still hasn't proven to us why necessarily this isn't a right option for soldiers to have. What does this bring for the soldiers in of themselves? One, Prince tells you that these people are this is going to be beneficial because their consciousness is still intact. Let's take his best case scenario. I think Prince tries to ask him a POI. He tries to answer his POI in the best way possible. One, Chair, I think because this is an assimilation and the motion already tells you that this was perfectly done, this then means that your consciousness is still intact. At best, let's say it's not. At least it's the closest thing to reality as possible. That then means that particular individual is most likely going to have the same experiences that they would rather have in their own lives in that assimilation at that particular point in time. So Rapi, whatever you said about, hey, we think that people are most likely not going to be conscious, please fix that through your partner. Cool. Then what does Prince tell you that is very important? What are soldiers? These are still people that have put their lives through a lot of things. They've put their lives through a lot of things. They're most likely the most sacrificial people within the society, within the status quo. This is important for you to note because giving them an option for them to do what they want is the least that we can do. Apart from just giving them a memorial service, but we're giving them an option to do this. I think when two soldiers die in a war and both of them had beforehand had made an informed decision to go into this assimilation, they're most likely going to be glad to see their next buddy, and they're most likely going to be glad to experience that thing. At least you're giving them a sense of autonomy in order for them to decide how their life continues after the normal afterlife. Because the normal afterlife is most likely something that looks like, oh, you're just waiting to be told whether you're going to hell to burn forever or you're going to heaven, dependent on the religion that you have at that particular point in time. I think then what is very important is all the benefits that Prince tells you. Things like your personality, your relationships, and all of those things. The biggest loss of death is not necessarily life on its own, but it's the connections that you've already created. It's the consciousness to say that, hey, these are the people that I've lived with. I think this is why even when people die, you literally have 7 minutes to go through those things. The reason why Prince would have to be in that 7 minutes of my time, it's because he has contributed heavily so having a simulation that will allow me to remind myself of a certain person or allow me to retain that same consciousness is something that is beneficial on the side of the house and something that we would rather subscribe to. Quickly, Rapi.
This is simple. When you frame that as being something that is irreversible, we don't get to a point of scrutinizing every decision that the military is specifically taking that might put people in danger.
Rabi, I think every soldier that is within the status quo can be in danger at best. But I don't think that governments are dumb people that are most likely going to say, I'm going to send my weakest soldier because I just want him to die. That is not going to happen in our side of the house. But still, it means that even if the government wants to take out people, I don't think that is only exclusive to our side only. I think that also happens in your side. If your idea is to say the same government, or rather the same people, or rather the same troops that are sending soldiers out, I have that power to send people in dangerous missions, they're most likely still happening in your side of the house. I still don't get why them dying and not having an option to do what they most likely want, to have is something that is beneficial on your side of the house. So it doesn't make sense to say, hey, just die and that's it, because you're most likely not going to hold people accountable and whatsoever. What are the takeaways from our case? I think we've already told you that this is an informed decision. We've already told you that this is an informed decision. We've already told you that this is something that this military personnel would most likely want to opt into. At best, this provides a lot of things, in terms of what are the soldiers' incentives. I think when someone takes a decision, it's because it resonates with the life that they would rather live. I would rather be in assimilation that reminds me of Prince, because that is the idea that I want to live in. I think soldiers that do that are soldiers that would rather live in a simulation where they fight until the end of the battle. At least what you're doing in our side of the house is giving the individual an option to keep on living. Thank you.
Now, thanks to the Deputy Prime Minister for that fine speech. We now welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition to summarize the entire top half.
Hi guys, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Hi. I'd like to give a shout out to my partner and to everyone who's made it so far. Oh my gosh, I'm so nervous. Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hello. You need to understand something, right? The reason why we value someone else's life is because we know that their lives is irreplaceable, right? And the world that which makes the government to be more incentivized to actually protect or keep that person's or protect their lives during those wars, right? This is what we're actually going for as the opposition side, right? But on their side, they're saying that if you die, therefore you get to actually have another chance to actually live in life, right? Which is very problematic in and of itself and actually doesn't benefit this individual specifically, right? Cool. So let's go to some point of rebuttals. So they come here and actually come and told us that, you know what, assuming feasibility, everything is like perfect, right? It means that it is done. Oh my gosh. It means that everything is done perfectly, right? Meaning that the simulation is actually perfect, right? Even so that the simulation is actually perfect, it doesn't undo the fact that the person has already died, right? Which is very harmful not only to those um actually harmful to the individual's family, right? But we need to understand that human life actually remains valuable in our world because it simply cannot be replaced, right? Even by state created substitute in and of itself, right? Which makes it hard, right? To us, yeah, which makes us want to keep the status quo as currently as it is, right? Cool. So this is what you actually get in their world. Battles. This is what you get into their world, right? They are weakening the social obligation to actually remember and honor the death of these people, right? So this is what they're doing. They're making that to become less socially disruptive, right? Because this simulation gives the society the psychological impression that these socials hasn't their lives hasn't been really lost, right? And since my partner has already told you that it means that the government is able to push people to go to extreme wars or hell wars, whatever the simulations that they want to be. It ought to make the government to actually get away with certain things in life and not actually being held accountable because they can simply tell the society or the public that, hey, their lives hasn't been really lost, but they still exist in Valhalla in and of itself, right? Which is actually very harmful in and of itself. But we're actually creating an emotion because the person is physically dead. A digital simulation can never be or amount to a physical appearance of a person, right? Which is what we're actually arguing for as the opposition side, right? We need to actually understand, right? Because on their side, remembrance actually becomes less necessary because the state invests less in saving the person's real world legacy because the person is going to continue to live in Valhalla, right? Meaning that they're actually changing the meaning of their sacrifice in and of itself to the person who has died, but they actually live again in Valhalla, right? Cool. So on the issue of, okay, on the level of
UI.
legitimacy, not taken, on the level of legitimacy, right? We think that we're actually more taking that point, right? Because we are saying the government should only intervene in death and grief when it is actually protecting the interest of the living, not defining the meaning of death for certain for people or that actually exist into our society, right? We say that we have more distribution of authority because we don't give the state the unnecessary power over something as fundamental as death and remembrance, right? And they come here and actually tell us that, you know what, there's actually consent that actually goes on, right? But we target that even if they say that consent actually exists on their side, it is consent is not permanent. This is what we actually have to understand, that they actually consent want, and but their actually digital life continues to actually exist into the society, right? Which is actually very problematic in and of itself because consent to enter is not
UI.
consent to everything that actually happens um after entering, right? Which is very problematic in and of itself. Rapid tells you that this things is actually pushing the government not to be accountable, right? And we need to understand that when harm is actually irreversible through the digital Valhalla, there is no outrage to actually hold the government accountable in and of itself, right? Pushing the incentive that making the military to have a unique incentive to actually exploit the person digitally, right? Because the military in and of itself has an institutional interest in creating heroic narratives, right? Not only that, they have to justify the past military operations that they actually that they actually done, right? So we need to actually understand that when a soldier actually dies, that digital life existent actually remains permanently available, right? And the state can potentially like turn that person into a symbol of a military service in and of itself, right? Even if they come and tell us that, you know what, they're going to take in rich people specifically to be the ones that do that, we tell you that is actually highly impossible on their side, because once you're going, this thing is actually applicable to actually people who are on the low rankings in an officer, right? How so? Because everyone wants to get to that high position and actually make more money to it. They're the ones who are most likely to actually buy into such things, because we tell you that the government is not actually going to show you and say that, you know what, tell you that we want you to actually go to extreme war in and of itself,
COI.
advance not taken, so that you can actually advance in life, right? We tell you that the people who in the lower ranks are the ones who are actually going to opt in more into this thing, which is very harmful, because we're telling you that risk your life in order for you to actually be to get a certain promotion in life, which is very problematic.
COI.
We tell you that they are the ones that actually want to actually move up into certain ranks that actually exist in that military space in and of itself, right? Which is very problematic in and of itself, because
Before
it
time.
leads to no accountability in and of itself not taken. It leads to the problem of accountability in and of itself, specifically from the government, because we tell you that families can not be the ones that actually understand the meaning of, or the memory that they actually serve into their world, right? Cool. So on the point of justification, right, we tell you that it is not morally justified for us to actually do that, right? So as much as this tech is so perfect in their world, so they say, right, it still doesn't justify the policies, because the benefit that comes, because we need to understand this, these benefits come after the person has actually died, not when the person is still alive, right? Even so, it doesn't erase the fact that this person is already dead in the real world. They just live digitally, right? We actually are which means that the harms in and of itself are irreversible, right? Because it doesn't benefit the society in and of itself, right? So if you were to decide, we should actually question the fact that who becomes more human, right? Should we value your life just because you're alive, or should we value your life after you have died and live digitally? So never been proud to oppose. Thank you.
House thanks the deputy leader of up for that fine speech. This brings us to the end of the top half. Moving into the closing half, welcome the member of government.
Yeah. Oh, goodness
Sorry, I can't hear
gracious.
you.
Okay, let me move.
Member of government. Member of government.
Am I not audible? I can
You
hear
are
you.
audible now. Yeah, you are audible
Okay.
now.
Okay, cool. Oh, thank God. Okay. Let me get my notes together. So I was moving to give the speech. So just give me a second. Okay. Sure. Okay, let me start with shout outs. Zesty, thank you so much for carrying me in this entire tournament. Yeah, it's been a lovely tournament speaking with you. So thank you so much for the entire job that you've been doing this entire rounds. Then Debate Society, Fraternity, I can see you here. So thank you so much for the support. Last but not least, my girl Lamar. Thank you so much. You're everything a man should need, should want. Okay, let's begin. I'm going to start in counting, but before I start, I want to make sure that I'm audible for the last time.
Yes, you are. Please start.
Okay, cool. I'm going to start then in 3, 2, 1. Let's start this debate correctly and properly from closing government. Let us be very clear about what the GovWard is proposing. We're not forcing soldiers into an artificial afterlife. We're not telling them that Valhalla is the only legitimate conception of death. And we are certainly not saying every soldier must want this, but we are saying something far much more different. When a person has spent their life serving in the military and we have the technological capacity to offer them an afterlife specifically designed around the values that gave meaning to that life, we should give them that choice to enter it. That distinction is important because the war the soldiers die in is not the war they spent their lives defending. After the battle, because of just how Valhalla is, after the Ragnarok war, society is fundamentally restructured. This means all institutions, old borders, old identities, and old social orders are being rebuilt. In that moment, then, one of the most important things we can preserve is the meaning people attached to their sacrifice. So military personnel are unusual because military service is not simply a profession, it is a community. It creates lifelong friendships through shared hardships. It creates identities through discipline and sacrifice. It creates relationships between people who have trusted one another with their lives. These people did not merely work together, they suffered together, they trained together, they lost friends together, they carried one another through experiences that almost nobody else in society can understand. So when you ask them what kind of afterlife would be meaningful to them, we should not begin by abstract theology. What we should ask them is what kind of existence preserves the things they spent their lives caring about. Within Valhalla answers that question. The first argument from closing government is that Valhalla preserves meaning after sacrifice. The first thesis here is that soldiers need their sacrifice to mean something. The greatest tragedy of death is not simply the consciousness ends, right? It is that the person loses the future in which the things they sacrifice for can continue to matter. So a soldier spends decades believing I am willing to die because something larger than myself is worth protecting. Then they die. And ordinarily then society moves on, the war ends, the country changes, their friends return home, even their child grew up. Eventually the person becomes a name and a memorial. But our world gives them far much more of a different possibility. The possibility that death does not erase the identity they spent their lives constructing. I think Valhalla is fundamentally a continuation of that identity. It is a place where warriors are not ashamed of having fought. They are not forced to abandon the relationships formed through war. They are not like asked to pretend that the most formative experiences of their lives never happened. Instead, those experiences become the foundation of their afterlife. This matters because humans derive meanings from narratives. We want our suffering to have been for something. We want our sacrifices to connect to a larger story. Yeah.
The person has died, Zwaga. Real life
Okay,
still
no.
specifically
Is
happened.
that a
This is a
POI?
digital
That's
simulation
fine.
of this person's
No.
life.
I'm not accepting that right now. Go away. Okay, we want our suffering to have been for something. We want our sacrifices to connect to a larger story. And soldiers have made perhaps the clearest possible sacrifice that they were willing to give up their lives for something larger than themselves. I think government gives them an alternative in which that sacrifice continues to have meaning. The second thing here is that the alternative is not neutral. Up tells you, why do we need Valhalla? Soldiers can simply go to whatever afterlife they begin with. This misunderstands the world we're debating, Chair. There is no certainty about what happens after life, after death in any world, right? There's no universally accepted metaphysical answer, right? But in different religions tell people different things. Some people believe in heaven, some people believe in reincarnation, some people believe in nothing, some people believe in punishment. None of this is guaranteed to preserve the specific identity that mattered to the soldier. And This becomes especially important for military personnel because their social identity can be morally complicated. They were trained to kill. They participated in violence. They were asked to do things that ordinary citizens' morality often treats as deeply troubling. Even when those actions were justified like by defense of others, soldiers can leave with the knowledge that their lives involve taking human lives. So Valhalla offers a radically different narrative here. It tells them you're not defined by the violence you committed, you're defined by the courage, loyalty, and sacrifice through which you endured. That is physically and psychologically morally valuable. Society often asks soldiers to carry that contradiction. We needed you to do terrible things for us, but you don't want to talk about what that means. So then Valhalla resolves that contradiction by giving them a community in which the warrior identity itself is understood and honored. But the second argument is that this preserves collective identity. This is the most important comparative. First thesis, soldiers do not die as isolated individuals. The central mistake here on Ops' model is treating death as an individual transition. For soldiers, it is often fundamentally collective. The person beside you in battle is not merely your colleague, they're the person whose life you trusted with yours. Military relationships are unusually intense because they're constructed through shared vulnerability. You train together, deploy together, you lose people together, and sometimes you survive because of the person next to you, they protected you. A collective identity built around that mutual sacrifice becomes something extraordinarily important because Valhalla preserves that. You do not enter a paradise rather, where you become an isolated individual enjoying private pleasures on the comparative of upside. You enter a society of warriors. The people you meet there understand what you experience. They understand the fear, the discipline, the grief, the exhalation, and most importantly, they understand why it matters. That is extraordinary form of belonging. But second mechanism on this argument, I think belonging is valuable because it's about recognition. Imagine two lives. In the first, you're individually happy. You have everything you could ever want, but nobody there understands the defining experiences of your life. In the second, you're surrounded by the people who shared those experiences, people who understand the person you became, people who know why you sacrificed, people who recognize the things you're proud of. The second is not merely more pleasurable, it gives you the recognition. Rapi, what's the POR? 3,
Nope.
2. Okay, cool. Last argument. Giving soldiers an afterlife that doesn't condemn their identity. The first thesis is that society has a complicated relationship with warriors. We think civilian society simultaneously asks soldiers to be heroes and condemns the very actions that made their job possible. We tell soldiers that you must be willing to kill for us, but we also construct moral and religious systems in which killing is associated with sin, violence, and moral danger. Again, this does not mean soldiers are necessarily condemned per se. It means their identity is often morally complicated. They have to live with the fact that the things that they were trained to do would be unacceptable in most every other civilian context. This means hell or any other contentation or suffering. Valhalla provides an alternative moral narrative. It says there's a place where the qualities that made you a soldier, that courage, loyalty, and sacrifice, are not the things that you have to apologize for. They're celebrated. That is deeply important because the alternative can produce a profound disconnect between the person they were asked to be and the society that receives them. This is not glorifying violence. We're not saying we're rewarding like killing, but because what Valhalla celebrates is not simply the act of killing, it celebrates the very virtues of that particular soldier. Very proud to propose. Okay.
House thanks the member of GOV for that fine speech. We now welcome the member of opposition to begin the closing opposition's case.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to please confirm my audibility.
Yep, you are.
Okay, perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Lushane Sujaring, and I'm the member of opposition. A big shout out to everyone for making it to the finals, and most importantly, a big shout out to my partner, Raheem. Shout out to you for making it to finals for public speaking as well as debate. Woo woo. With that being said, I would like to please. Okay, hold on. Let me just set up my own timer here. Okay, I'm ready. So I would like to please start my timer in 3, 2,
One, before our extension chair and panel, I want to deal with two assumptions that opening government has smuggled into this debate, which were the biggest chats that we got from them. Other than that, they were irrelevant. First of all, stop calling this an autonomy debate. PM tells you that death, and DPM by extension, tells you that death is the ultimate loss of agency, and therefore continued consciousness is inherently valuable. Fine. But if the injustice is that human beings lose consciousness when they die, that proves like a right for human beings, not soldiers. Government, though, for this motion deliberately restricts access on the basis of military service. So the burden was not necessarily to prove would you rather have this option than no option. Obviously, is to prove why should serving in the military be the condition through which you acquire this extraordinary option. And PM's answer is sacrifice. Soldiers risk more, therefore we owe them more. But the second government says that Valhalla stops being a neutral exercise of autonomy and becomes compensation for military service. That distinction determines this debate because we're not opposing people's abstract freedom to choose an afterlife. We oppose a state deliberately attaching an extraordinary afterlife to one particular institution and then pretending the attachment carries no consequences, which basically throws out the whole consent chat. What is in the next biggest chat that we got from them, which was basically responded to? What we're telling you here is that finally they tell us that soldiers deserve this, and they basically claim completely reverses the state's duty to care. Government repeatedly tells you that these are uniquely vulnerable people because they sacrifice more for society. Oh, DLO tried to answer this, but let me actually fix a lot of things right. Correct. But vulnerability creates an obligation for the state to protect people from exploitation, not an entitlement for the state to create increasingly extraordinarily rewards attached to accepting that exploitation. And PM and DPM, eventually this trickles down to everyone, does not save them either. If civilians eventually deserve access because continued consciousness is valuable, give civilians access on that basis. There is no reason military personnel need to become experimental gateways whose service purchases first access to immortality. So here's the lens for this particular debate. Do not ask whether paradise is better than nothing. Government was handed a perfect paradise. The triviality wins that question. What are we telling you here? Ask what happens when the state takes something extraordinarily desirable and makes military service the gateway through which you receive it. Because once they do that, the relevant consequence begins long before anybody enters Valhalla. That is where that's where closing opposition takes this particular debate. Prince, you can ask your POI quickly.
Yeah, first of all, you do nothing to our case. I explained this will trickle down to society, but specifically because the army already does go to frontline for every threat to society. Explain why they don't have that obligation and duty already. And this is similar to them. They're not just experimental objects. They signed to be those
So POI time
experimental
is done.
objects.
Prince, that analogy only works where soldiers are uniquely necessary to test the technology. But feasibility is assumed in this debate. You do not need soldiers to discover whether or not Valhalla works. More importantly, the motion does not characterize this as a temporary clinical trial. You explicitly justify their access because they sacrifice for the state. The moment military service becomes the reason somebody gets priority access to extraordinary afterlife, it functions as compensation for being a soldier. Saying civilians might get it later doesn't remove the incentive today. It proves soldiers get a privilege today precisely because they served. But let's tell you why it's wrong for them to get that particular angle. What is in our extension here, Chair? We're giving you two extensions here, right? Well, Valhalla increases the intensity and brutality of warfare because it weakens both restraint and accountability of the state, and two, it lets the state substitute an afterlife benefit for its obligations to military personnel while they're alive, including veterans who died decades after service. What am I telling you here, Chair? Government has treated Valhalla as though it's simply a nice thing waiting at the end of somebody's life. But the motion does not say soldiers killed in battle. It says all military personnel upon death. This means somebody can serve at 25, retire at 45, live another 35 years, and still know that their military service has purchased access to Valhalla. Our claim is that once the state attaches an extraordinary and guaranteed afterlife to military service, it becomes easier to demand more from these people, both on the battlefield and throughout their lives, because the state can increasingly substitute future glory for present responsibility. We're telling you here, you increase the intensity of warfare and weaken restraints that normally exist within war. War requires hesitation. That is the nature of war and why regulations exist for war. We need soldiers to hesitate before unnecessarily escalating violence. We need commanders to hesitate before demanding extraordinary sacrifice of life. We need individuals to care about the moral and legal consequences of what they do during war. Valhalla systematically weakens those particular restraints because it basically creates an afterlife whose entire organizing identity is warriorhood. Why? For giving your life. The person who enters is not promised judgment based upon whether or not the war they fought was just, whether or not they killed somebody unjustly, whether or not they commit acts of atrocities like rape and mass murders unnecessarily. They qualify because they merely served. This is fundamentally different from religion. A religious soldier may believe that after death they still like answer to a moral authority, completely independent of their like commander and country. They can still ask, even if my government celebrates what I did, will I ultimately be judged for it? Government replaces that uncertainty with something extraordinarily predictable. I have access to Valhalla
So
because I am military personnel. That matters most at the margins when somebody is deciding whether to accept an extraordinarily like dangerous mission, continue fighting rather than surrendering, and participating in conduct knowing that it's morally questionable and leads to unnecessary death. Government has weakened one important reason to pull backwards: the possibility that death ends everything, and that what you do before death carries consequences you cannot escape. And this then becomes particularly dangerous when accountability for wartime wrongdoing is slow. Investigation takes years, trials happen decades after conflict, and governments change. So evidence emerges long later. But this motion says that upon death, military personnel get Valhalla. So there's an obvious accountability problem here. People accused of serious wrongdoing may die before earthly like institutions ever finish holding them accountable, while receiving access to a perfect warrior paradise. Even where like formal punishment occurs like during life, government still promises ultimate destination whose qualification is military status other than like moral deservingness. Our claim is that not that soldiers suddenly become monsters because Valhalla exists. Our claim is comparative because we're telling you when you reduce the perceived finality of death while simultaneously guaranteeing warriorhood and extraordinary continuation, you shift behavior at the margins towards greater risk taking, recklessness,
Pure
and
eye.
more massacres happening unjustly. What are we then telling you here, right? We're telling you that more importantly, look at what happens at the military personnel like who survived the war. Government's entire moral justification is these people sacrificing enormously for us, therefore we owe them Valhalla. We think this is precisely the dangerous bargain because of what soldiers are actually owed for the sacrifice is care while they're still alive. Military personnel can return to service with psychological trauma, PTSD, and unable to live like regular lives. Those are expensive obligations the government has to meet. With Valhalla, the government can neglect all of these particular margins and actually take the easy way out and say, well, you have Valhalla at the end of it, so we don't need to care for you while you're still alive. This creates years of suffering afterwards, and this becomes the price for having served. And there's also like a just cause here, right? A good state should compensate sacrifice when like compensation can still improve the person's actual living conditions, not the digital and technological costs that government wants to cost us. Never been prouder to oppose. Here.
The House thanks the member of opposition for that fine speech. We now welcome the government whip to summarize the Gov bench.
Okay, this is Tiana here, pronouns are she, her. Before I begin, I just like to give like a couple of shout outs. Shout out to everyone in the finals for making this far. And shout out to my partner, of course. Thank you, Zwanga, for a great tournament. Yeah, guys, and shout out to Cap for organizing this tournament. Things have been quite well. And yeah, hopefully I can get a W here. If not, it's okay. But before I begin, I'd just like to confirm I'm audible again, Chair. I'm so sorry. Chair?
Yep.
I'd just like to confirm I'm audible again before I start.
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, starting then. 3, 2, 1. I think I'm going to engage the debate as it went on. Opening government did a great job at setting up this debate and telling us about how things would work, but they don't necessarily do enough to justify why the choice to go to Valhalla in and of itself needs to exist. I think this is specifically where CG takes the debate from opening, because we're able to explain why not only the benefits trickle down to society, but we're able to explain to you why on principle and pragmatics, the choice in and of itself is something that matters. The idea of continuity and the idea of like going into a place that sort of legitimizes your existence of why you chose to live life in the first place, why you became a soldier, and your entire life story. I think that particular thing is particularly important to conserve. We mechanize and analyze why these things are then the thing that justifies the particular choice, and I mean the choice in and of itself existing. Cool. Let's engage OO's like really fragmented, weird cases. Let's talk about the first idea of closure. They say, oh, hey, families are more likely to have closure without a simulated afterlife. And they say that grief comes from people knowing that you won't come back. Quick response here. their comparative doesn't have any closure for family members because no one actually quantitatively knows where people go after they die. The idea of closure comes from certainty that the issue is resolved and knowing all of the variables involved. You only gain access to knowing about those variables and resolving the conundrum of where the fallen soldier went after they died in our extension, where the family knows that their loved one resides in a digital paradise after their death. I think that wins the clash quite clearly. There's no counterfactual on their side where you get better closure. But on exploitation, they say, oh, hey, Gov can exploit individuals by putting more people into danger. I think CO tried to run this extension as well. I think there's a lower likelihood that there will be an unprecedented exacerbation of people opting into danger due to governmental pressure. I think largely because that pressure is quite intuitive and was never proven or mechanized on opposition. The first reason is because the government incentive for mass recruitment of soldiers is unclear from OO and CO. Like, why do governments suddenly want to recruit their entire populations to become soldiers? Like, I don't know. But B, I think the opt-in is still a choice. Not every soldier will opt into going into Valhalla. We don't have to defend that because we're not mandating it on a government. We're introducing it as an option. That means the pressure they talked about is not as coercive as they try to mechanize. And I don't think you can buy any of those particular impacts. They can't even claim on opening opposition that soldiers are going to consent into a system that they don't understand. If the soldier has to go through things like signing contracts, NDAs, doing cost benefit analysis, consulting their entire families while they're still alive, they need to understand how the system works in order to opt into it. I think it's counterintuitive to just how human psychology works to assume that, oh, hey, all of these soldiers going to Valhalla don't know anything about how it looks like. That's like a really, really extreme case. You can't buy that. But on the chat of government ownership of consciousness, I think they say, oh, government can change your identity in Valhalla, blah, blah, blah. This is a blatant lie that didn't come from any of the policies that government proposed in this debate. So the entire case in and of itself is a straw man. But I think let's just deconstruct it by explaining the logical gaps. I think the first thing is to note that there's no explanation as to why the state has an incentive to change the identity of a dead soldier on a digital platform that has limited to no pragmatic impact, because there's no net benefit that that could have for them. Like the government is fighting wars in real life and not in Valhalla. Why would they opt into changing people's identities in Valhalla in order to get some kind of benefit? I don't know what the benefit is. It's speculative at best. You can't really buy those cases. But cool. I think let's move to closing opposition then. I think CO was trying to leverage the semantics of the motion in order to attack the structure of the policy and not the ideology and justification given to you by CG as to why the policy needs to exist. In other words, CO concedes to all of CG's case and all of its impacts if we make it open source and don't put a red tape by saying, oh, hey, it's only the military. I think in that particular case, like you need to then buy CG cases and CG's extension a lot more than CO extension, just based off of the fact that they're conceding to most of our impacts. But I think when they have chats about, oh, hey, Valhalla weakens restraint because it can make the idea of warriorship a tokenistic kind of expression and makes people think, oh, hey, I can just opt into making really rash decisions. I think it's contingent again on all of the military personnel opting into this particular Valhalla without choice. The narrative only has the particular impact that they try to claim on closing opposition when that exists. So like, I don't think you can really buy that particular impact. But even if they want to say it weakens restraint, I don't think that's specifically the worst kind of impact in this debate. Because if this soldier opted into this particular war system in and of itself, their entire life story is predicated on them being a warrior. And that's why they derived meaning from their life. Like Zwanga tells you, we still think it's justified for them to opt into that particular system because it's okay. Like that's because they literally get to live in paradise afterwards. But I think when they talk about, oh, hey, but it's unjustified in terms of accountability, we don't hold people accountable because anyone can qualify for Valhalla simply by the virtue of the fact that they're a military personnel, regardless of what they did in their lives and how they lived. Cool. Let's engage their comparative, since they never really tell you what that comparative looks like and tell you why that's particularly, or why our mechanism is particularly better. I think Zwanga tells you a really important context of how military personnel or people who join military services have really complex moral identities. Like the way they live their lives is not really as black and white as these kinds of theological religions that CO tries to push, or not CO tries to push, exist in CO's comparative exclusively to dictate what the afterlife looks like, is actually propagating. I think that's specifically important then because it's acontextual to sort of how these soldiers live their lives. Like they might try to say, oh, hey, on CO, you committed atrocities by picking up a gun and killing people, but that's literally what you're trained to do as a soldier. It would literally go against why you opted into this institution in the first place if you don't do that. But I think at that particular point in time, it's important to note then that we need to preserve the interest of this particular soldier in that capacity and not label them as a morally abhorrent person because they might have picked up that gun and killed someone to save someone else. I think that's specifically important because we're able to inspect how morality needs to exist a lot better on CG, where we interface a system that actually interfaces with how soldiers exist. But before that, POI, before way ups, final way ups, POI.
This is a digital infrastructure. It's likely to cost real life and physical resources within that specific regard to maintain. What do you think about that to the lives of the people that you value when you die?
Okay, sure. Even if it costs like money and stuff like that, we don't really think it's that big of a chat here. It says assuming feasibility. I don't think I think opening government even did a bit of legwork in explaining how these systems will look. Like we can roll with that context. It's no problem here. But I think we win the debate from CG because we explain to you why specifically CG doesn't sentence individuals to eternal fire and brimstone and hellfire for being warriors. Instead, it gives them a paradise where they can continue to pursue what gives them genuine happiness. I think that particular thing is very important because of the fact that we're able to propagate the idea of meaning behind life. I think these things are very important to military personnel, especially upon death, because before the idea of death, these are the things that matter the most to them and need to be propagated. I don't think opposition gets these particular benefits at all. And with that, I'm proud to propose.
House thanks the government whip for that fine speech. To summarize the entire debate, we welcome the opposition.
All right. Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, I'll get into shout outs first. But before that, guys, if you want to offer POIs, kindly raise your hand. Shout out to my very, very brilliant partner. Of course, shout out to the different debaters, public speakers, judges, whatsoever we met at the tournament. Amazing experience, everyone. Shout out to my union, KYU. Shout out to you guys. You're all amazing. And shout out to anyone that I've ever trained and I've been trained under. I think that's just it. Okay. Yeah, I will signal you when I'm gonna start. I'm doing a countdown and also just prepare my notes. Okay. So just a second, please. I need to widen the screen so that I join Zoom call again. All right, you can start my speech in 1, 2, 3, and go. I'm going to weigh the debate in a very simple manner. First, we are going to weigh the debate on the philosophical questions that exist within the debate. I think these are the major stances that teams try to mechanize over. It's better to beat them at premise rather than getting into the mechanistic quibbles that they have mostly non-solved. First, which life is much more meaningless? Is it much more meaningless for you to move into a digital world within that specific regard and all those particular things, including the issues that concern consent within that specific regard? I think this is how we want to engage the autonomy. CG's mechanization is able to show that this is no longer going to be an option. I think it is definitely so. Why? Because if you develop a culture and the value that you literally want to prove your speech with is that we get to be brotherhood, we get to be everything else that is connected to being a soldier, I think you're much more likely to push that soldiers now make it a ritual or some kind of brotherhood that exists within the army for all of us to eventually join in Valhalla. There are two problems with this, and this is how I want to explicitly weigh above them, is that this then means that you're less likely to have a valuable or meaningful life within that particular regard. It's too constrained of choice. That is to say, we don't know anything that exists within Valhalla beyond the idea that we are waiting to be yet another instrument of war, or to be only one identity that we have to be soldiers. You have no mom, you have no dad, you less likely have the family that you fought for, or the same country that you fought for within that particular regard. The mere fact that you get into a contract that you cannot exist, and I know this sounds a little bit similar, but the semantic here is that you don't have so many options within that specific regard to be able to enjoy. I think that that life is eventually meaningless. But again, notice the nature of rhetoric that CG sells the case over. That is the reason as to why this is less likely going to be some kind of like option that you get to choose or not. I think the second thing that we need to talk about in the debate lies within the philosophical question. Like, what really is better? I think it's better for people to not know whether they will be suffering at all and just die within that specific regard. The inexistence of suffering after death and the mere fact that you still recollect and remember that you don't have your family and you're in this digital existence and you remember that your family is out there chilling with someone else is probably less likely something that is valuable. What is the end goal of this implication? I don't think that we should convince soldiers that the best thing we should give them after death and the life we should give them after death is one to, be merry and sing war chants even after they die within that specific regard. That is not a life that dignifies a soldier. It maintains them as an instrument of war, even in death. Again, OG tries to argue that death cannot be controlled and that's why we should control it.
Pure
No,
eye.
death cannot be controlled. Man. Death cannot be controlled, and I think that is why exactly we shouldn't control it. Any person who controls the narrative of death gets to assign value to it, and as such manipulates people. I think why this is specifically harmful, like really at a finals, anyways, why this is specifically harmful is that it is much more likely to then cause neglect, because our conversation talks about in extension why people are much more likely not to focus about you as a veteran, as a war veteran, to give you health care, to give you benefits. The Purple Heart policies within that specific regard. People shove you off that you can, you know what, you can just choose to live on. After all, your life is already made out. You are a soldier within that specific regard. Those benefits do not significantly matter. The problem is that when people get out of warring situations within that specific regard, they still have so many worries about how their families benefited in the short term, worries about how most likely they are going to live with the PTSD and all those particular things. You tell them wait for death, and that is the much viable option that you probably have to dignify yourself. You only get dignity in death. I think the semantic here also becomes very, very important. What we talk about is how you intensify war. Why does this harm outscale everyone else in the debate? I think if we care about soldiers within that specific regard, we should care about alternatives of diplomacy and discourse, and also fear very much countries that are willing to use extremist nationalist agendas to much more likely exploit like human beings within that specific regard to put them in war. There are two ways I'm going to weigh up this. The first is that there are harms that occur to people who are pushed to join war, to join like military within that specific regard. Their life become meaningless during trainings. We have had of multiple ways in which people are pushed to the end during the military training in of itself, but also in the circumstances of war, the banality of evil. They are told to do these exorbitant orders. Closing government argues that the morality no longer matters, the contradiction no longer matters, so these people are not at heed. Note that this causes more suffering towards those people who are likely to be protected, but also the way in which people much more likely engage within war. So it means that war becomes much more intensified and becomes much more harmful, all because people believe they can go ahead and in Valhalla and live on afterwards within that specific regard. If terrorists get this specific sort of, or terrorist states are able to get this specific sort of technology, I think the comparative becomes much more worse. Prince, you're winning POI.
Yeah, Rahim, in our world, at least you can still choose not to go to Valhalla if you don't want to suffer and just want to non-exist. In your world, those people who still want suffering and not non-existence can't choose to. They don't have that choice.
Okay, I'll give you another way up. The other question that was in the debate was a question about people's other philosophical conception about life after death. I think you make the choice making here much more complex. You introduce a new paradox of choice within that specific regard. People only had to struggle with whether they need to be a moral being to go to heaven or reincarnate and all those things. Now you force a religious person to decide whether he wants to join the army brotherhood in Valhalla or he wants to go ahead and join Allah. I think this makes it much more complex. Again, that even if that choice and option exists, it literally creates a lot of opportunity cost for you to be choosing either, and that is why it's fundamentally harmful. I think it's not a choice that gets to validate people's interests. It just makes the calculation of that particular decision very harder within that regard. Let's weigh on positive material. Outside the existence of this policy, Chair, important to note, this is impacting and weighing. Outside the existence of this specific policy, governments have incentives to benefit these particular military officers when they are alive. And I think why this is important and why we are giving you context around like extreme intensification of military within that regard is because we are in that specific type of age where people are using AI-controlled weapons that just kill people anyhow. And now you get to convince people are going to die with AI robots because they can necessarily, just go and fight and die for Valhalla and all those particular things. The narrative surrounding whether war should be just and just war theory grow weaker within that specific regard. But just to weigh up the positive material here, I think we are the only team that gets to do this. Not our extension is able to explain that when you don't have these specific options, you're much more likely to give more justice to people within the military before death, but also to their families after death. You don't have this specific option. So the only way you guarantee those benefits is by strengthening recompensation packages, by making sure that soldiers don't die innocently by constantly reinforcing military rules and regulations, because that's the only form of justice you can give them. You don't have Valhalla, you have the real world. You have real world implementation policies. For goodness sake, we don't know whether Valhalla even has a government to give these people agency when they are there. That at best, you force governments to be able to recompensate these particular things to the families that are alive and to these individuals before they die or after they die, but at least when it exists quantifiable in the real world. Here.
House thanks the opposition whip for that fine speech. And this brings us to the end of what has been an interesting debate round. Thank you to all the teams. Cross hands and shake yourselves virtually. Panelists, we are going to move to Discord, room 1 adjudication room. Let's move to Discord, room 1 adjudication room for deliberations. Thank you guys. I think Ocom will communicate time for awards and all of that. Good luck.
I'm sorry, is the award going to happen here or in Discord? Can anybody help me with that, please? Any tap team or cap, please. Is the award happening here or in Discord?
In case it's happening here, that will be communicated. So that's just fine.
I didn't hear what you said.
Like I said, in case it will happen here, it will be communicated.